The dungeons breathed with her. Each exhale of wind through the corridors carried the metallic tang of old blood and the mineral dampness of stone that had never seen sunlight. Ilara moved through the darkness with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to make herself small, invisible, forgettable. The bucket of murky water sloshed against her hip as she descended the spiral stairs, counting steps by memory rather than sight. 47 to the lower level. 48 to where the forgotten ones lived, or died. She was Omega, the lowest rank in a pack that had already cast her aside like spoiled meat. Her crime had been mercy, feeding a prisoner condemned to starvation, a rebel who had spoken against the Council of Elders. They had stripped her of her name before the full moon, bound her wrists with silver cord that burned her skin, and sentenced her to clean the cells where traitors rotted, where wolves who had loved too much or fought too hard waited for execution. The torch in her free hand flickered, casting her shadow long and distorted against walls carved with warnings in the old tongue. She could not read them, but she felt their weight. Curses, promises of suffering for those who defied the natural order. Her natural order was suffering. She had been born small, in a world that worshipped strength, born gentle in a culture that celebrated violence. Her wolf had never emerged, not even during her first shift ceremony when she turned 16. The pack elders had examined her with clinical disgust, pronouncing her defective, broken, a genetic failure. But she was still useful for cleaning up after the strong ones made their messes. The first 3 cells were empty, except for rust-stained chains and the echo of old screams. She scrubbed them anyway, methodical and thorough, because routine kept the loneliness at bay. The 4th cell held a body, or what remained of one, and she wrapped it carefully in burlap before dragging it to the collection point. She did not look at the face. She never looked at the faces. It was in the 7th cell, the one carved deepest into the mountain's heart, that she heard it. A whimper, soft and broken, like the sound of wind through cracked glass. Ilara froze, her pulse suddenly loud in her ears. Nothing lived down here except rats and the occasional spider. The prisoners were kept on the upper levels where guards could watch them. This level was for storage, for forgotten things. The sound came again, weaker this time. She approached the iron bars slowly, holding her torch high. The cell was small, barely large enough for a grown wolf to turn around. The floor was covered in straw, gone black with moisture, and something darker. Blood, her nose told her, fresh enough to still smell of life. And in the corner, curled into a ball of matted fur and trembling limbs, was a wolf pup. Her breath caught. He was small, perhaps 3 months old, with fur the color of winter moonlight, silver-white streaked with pale gold. But it was the chains that made her stomach turn, silver chains, crusted with rust and something that looked like ash wrapped around his tiny body. They had worn through the fur, leaving raw wounds that wept clear fluid. One of his back legs was bent at an angle that made her wince. The pup's eyes opened at her approach. They were not the amber or brown of normal wolves. They were the deep, endless blue of the sky before dawn. Ancient eyes in a young face. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, though she knew he could not answer. Pups his age could not shift back to human form yet, could barely understand human speech. But those eyes understood. They held intelligence far beyond his apparent age, and something else, recognition perhaps, or warning. She should leave. She should report this to the guards and let them handle it. Getting involved with whatever political game had led to a pup being chained in the deepest dungeon would only bring more punishment. She was already broken. She could not afford to be shattered. The pup whimpered again, and the sound cracked something in her chest that had not broken during all her years of abuse and isolation. Ilara set down her bucket and torch. She knelt in the filthy straw, her uniform soaking up the dampness, and reached through the bars with trembling fingers. Whispers in the dark. The pup flinched when her fingers first touched his fur, a reflexive curl of his small body that made the chains rattle and bite deeper into his wounds. Ilara froze, letting her hand rest against the cold stone floor, just inches from him, palm up in a gesture of peace. She had no dominance to offer, no alpha command that would soothe him. She had only this, the simple language of gentleness that her pack had beaten out of most of its members. "I won't hurt you," she murmured, her voice barely above a breath. "I promise. I only want to help." Minutes passed. The torch burned lower in its sconce. Somewhere far above, she heard the distant clang of the guard change, the heavy boots of wolves who still had status, who still belonged. Down here, there was only the sound of their breathing, hers steady and deliberate, his quick and pained. Slowly, so slowly it seemed to take hours, the pup uncurled. His blue eyes never left her face as he dragged himself forward, each movement clearly agony. The chains scraped against stone with a sound that made her teeth ache. When he was close enough, he pressed his muzzle into her palm. His nose was hot with fever. Ilara's heart clenched. She had no medical training, no healing gift like some wolves possessed. But she knew infection when she felt it. The silver was poisoning him, working its way through his small body like a slow death sentence. She glanced back toward the stairs. Her shift lasted until dawn. She had perhaps 4 more hours before the day guards came, before questions would be asked about why she lingered in the lower levels. 4 hours to decide if she would walk away or commit treason. Because that's what this was, she realized with cold certainty. You did not chain a pup in silver and bury him in the forgotten depths of the dungeon unless you wanted him dead in a way that could not be traced back to you, unless his death was meant to be slow and painful and secret. "Who are you?" she asked, studying his face. Beneath the dirt and blood, beneath the fever-bright eyes and labored breathing, there was something almost regal about him. The shape of his skull, perhaps. The way he held himself despite the pain, as if he remembered being something more than this broken thing in chains. She made her decision without fully realizing it. Her hand went to the ring of keys at her belt, keys that were meant only for cleaning supplies and waste disposal, not for cells. But she had noticed weeks ago that one of the keys fit the oldest locks, a design flaw perhaps, or an oversight. She had said nothing. Now she was grateful for that silence. The lock on the cell door was ancient iron, not silver. It opened with a groan that seemed to echo through the entire mountain. Ilara winced, waiting for shouts, for the thunder of approaching feet. Nothing came. The darkness held its breath. She crawled into the cell, pulling her bucket and the small cloth she used for cleaning behind her. The pup watched her with those impossible blue eyes, his small chest rising and falling too fast. She soaked the cloth in clean water, water meant for scrubbing floors, and gently began to clean the wounds around the chains. He whimpered but did not pull away. Instead he pressed closer, as if her touch, painful as it was, offered something more precious than comfort. As if he had been alone in the dark for so long that even pain accompanied by gentleness was a gift. "I need to examine the chains," she told him, speaking more to steady herself than because she thought he understood. "They're silver. They're killing you." The chains were locked with a mechanism she did not recognize, something complex and old, with runes carved into the metal that made her skin prickle with unease. Magic. Real magic. Not the simple pack bonds or shift abilities that all wolves possessed. This was witchwork, or something even older. She had no way to break them. Frustration welled up in her throat. She had survived by accepting her powerlessness, by never fighting against the tide that pushed her down. But looking at this pup, this innocent creature suffering for crimes he could not possibly have committed, something stirred in her that felt dangerously like defiance. "I'll come back," she promised, running her hand gently over his head between his ears. His eyes were starting to close, exhaustion or fever claiming him. "I'll bring medicine, food. I'll figure out how to get these chains off. Just Hold on, please. The pup's tongue rasped once against her wrist, a tiny gesture of trust that nearly broke her. Then his eyes closed completely, his breathing evening out into something that might have been sleep or might have been unconsciousness. Ilara worked quickly after that, cleaning the cell as best she could, changing the straw, leaving what little food she had smuggled in her pockets, dried meat that was meant for her own dinner. She filled a shallow bowl with clean water and placed it within reach of his muzzle. Before she left, she paused at the cell door. Something made her turn back, made her really look at him again, at the particular shade of his fur, white gold like the moon, at the unusual size of his paws, which seemed too large for his body, as if he would grow into something massive, at those eyes, still visible as thin crescents beneath half-closed lids, blue as a king's crown. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She locked the cell carefully, checking twice that it appeared undisturbed. As she gathered her cleaning supplies and headed back toward the stairs, she tried to convince herself that she had imagined the significance, that she was reading meaning into coincidence. But she could not shake the feeling that she had just made a choice that would change everything or destroy her completely. The gifts of shadows. Ilara learned to move through her days like a ghost. Her mind split between the world above and the secret below. She scrubbed floors in the pack house with mechanical precision, her hands moving while her thoughts spiraled around the problem of silver chains and blue eyes. She stood in meal lines with the other Omegas, absorbing their gossip about pack politics and mating ceremonies, filing away any mention of prisoners or dungeons or missing wolves. There were whispers, she discovered, always whispers in a pack this large, currents of rumor that flowed beneath the official narrative like underground rivers. The Alpha King had vanished 3 months ago during a hunting trip in the Northern Territories. Some said he had been ambushed by rogues. Others claimed he had simply abandoned his throne, disgusted with the Council of Elders who truly ruled while he served as a figurehead. A few brave souls suggested assassination, though they spoke carefully, and only to trusted friends. The official story was that the king had gone into seclusion to mourn his mate, who had died giving birth to a stillborn pup the previous winter. He would return when his grief permitted. No one mentioned a pup in chains. No one spoke of the dungeon's lowest levels. Ilara listened and said nothing. She had perfected the art of invisibility years ago. The slight stoop of her shoulders, the way she kept her eyes down, the careful blandness of her expression. People forgot she was there. They spoke freely around her as if she were furniture. She used that. She stole supplies with the methodical planning of someone who understood that a single mistake would mean death. Bandages from the healer's storage, just a few, taken over several days so no one would notice. Salve made from silver leaf that was meant to counteract silver poisoning. Half a jar carefully transferred to a smaller container. Food was easier. Scraps from the kitchen, dried meat, hard cheese that would not spoil. She hid everything in her cleaning bucket, beneath the false bottom she had carved painstakingly with a stolen knife. At night, she descended to the 7th cell. The pup was always waiting, those blue eyes tracking her movement from the moment she appeared at the top of the stairs. He had learned to recognize her footsteps, she realized, learned to distinguish her rhythm from the rare occasions when guards patrolled the lower levels. She worked in careful silence, cleaning his wounds with the stolen salve, changing his water, bringing what food she could. The silver chains remained. She had no tools capable of breaking enchanted metal, no knowledge of the magic that bound them. But she could ease his suffering. She could keep him alive. Slowly, impossibly, he began to heal. The fever receded. The wounds, while still angry and weeping, no longer looked infected. He started to eat with more appetite, his small body gradually filling out, and he started to trust her. It happened in increments so small she almost missed them. The way he no longer flinched when she reached for him, how he would lean into her touch, his eyes closing in what looked like contentment, the soft whine he made when she prepared to leave, as if asking her to stay just a moment longer. She found herself staying longer than was wise, sitting in the filthy straw with her back against the wall while he curled up against her leg, his breathing deep and even in sleep. She talked to him during these hours, whispered confessions she had never spoken aloud, about her childhood before she understood that being gentle was a weakness, about her mother, who had loved her fiercely until the pack took her away for re-education that she never returned from, about the loneliness that had carved her hollow. The pup listened with those ancient eyes, and sometimes Ilara could swear he understood. That he was not just a frightened young wolf, but someone much older trapped in a small, broken body. On the 14th night, she arrived to find him standing. It was the first time he had been on his feet since she discovered him. His injured leg still dragged slightly, but he had managed to pull himself upright, his small frame trembling with effort. When she opened the cell door, he limped toward her with determination that made her chest tight. He did not stop at her feet. Instead, he pressed his entire body against her legs, his head tilted back to look at her, and for the first time he made a sound that was not pain. It was a yip, high and bright, the sound of a pup greeting his pack. Ilara sank to her knees without thinking, her hands buried in his fur, and felt something break open inside her. Something that had been frozen for so long she had forgotten it existed. It felt like grief and joy twisted together, like coming home to a place she had never been. "You're getting stronger," she whispered, pressing her face against his neck. He smelled like the salve and clean straw and something else, something wild and magnetic that made her wolf, her absent, broken wolf, stir for the first time in years. The pup rumbled against her, a sound too deep for his small chest. Not quite a growl, but close to it. A sound of contentment, of claiming. She should have been afraid. Should have recognized the danger in growing attached to something she could not keep, could not save. But fear felt distant in this moment, irrelevant. All that mattered was the warm weight of him in her arms, the steady beat of his heart against her palm, and the strange, impossible feeling that she was exactly where she was meant to be. It was only later, as she climbed the stairs toward the world above, that she realized what she had felt in that moment. What her broken wolf had recognized before her conscious mind could catch up. A mate bond, impossible. Pups his age did not bond. Omegas like her did not have destined mates. They were given to whichever alpha wanted them, used and discarded. And yet she had felt it, clear as moonlight cutting through fog. The pull, the recognition, the sense of two souls touching across distance and time. She pressed her hand against her chest, where her heart hammered against her ribs, and tried to breathe through the panic. This changed everything. This made what she was doing infinitely more dangerous, and infinitely more impossible to stop. Because if she was right, if the bond was real, then the pup in the 7th cell was not just any young wolf suffering under an unjust punishment. He was hers, and she would burn the world down before she let anyone hurt him again. Moonblood and revelation. The full moon rose, bloated and red over the pack house, painting everything the color of old wounds. Ilara watched it from the narrow window of the Omega dormitory, her stomach twisted with dread. Full moon nights meant ceremonies, celebrations, the raw display of pack hierarchy. It meant alphas drunk on moon madness would roam the halls looking for omegas to assert dominance over. It meant pain, humiliation, and the kind of violence that was called tradition. She had learned to make herself scarce during these nights, to hide in the deepest corners of the pack house, to volunteer for the worst jobs, emptying chamber pots, scrubbing blood from the fighting rings, anything that would keep her away from the central courtyard where the pack gathered. Tonight she had an even better excuse. The dungeons were always understaffed during celebrations. No one wanted to miss the hunt, the fights, the frenzy of wolves giving in to their most primal instincts. She could slip down to the 7th cell and stay there until dawn, safe in the dark with the pup who had become the center of her secret life. She waited until the drums started, until she heard the first howls echoing through the stone corridors. Then she gathered her supplies, more salve, strips of clean cloth, a pouch of dried venison she had saved from her own rations, and descended into the depths. The pup was agitated. She sensed it before she even reached his cell, felt it like static electricity crawling across her skin. When she came into view, he was pacing the small space, his limp barely noticeable now. His head was up, nose working the air, a low whine building in his throat. "Hey," she called softly, unlocking the door. "What's wrong?" He spun toward her voice, and his eyes, those impossible blue eyes, were glowing. Not reflecting light, but generating it, a pale luminescence that made him look otherworldly, dangerous. Ilara's breath caught. She had seen eyes glow like that before, in the oldest wolves, the most powerful ones, alphas whose bloodlines stretched back to the first packs before humans had built cities and forgotten that monsters were real. The pup, no, she needed to stop thinking of him as a pup, she realized with cold certainty, moved toward her with a grace that did not belong in that small body. When he reached her, he did not press against her legs as he usually did. Instead, he sat, regal despite the chains and the filth, and held her gaze. And in that gaze, she saw, not vision, not exactly, but knowledge that flooded into her mind like water breaking through a dam. Images, a throne room carved from white stone, a crown of antlers and silver, a name spoken with reverence and fear, Kieran, the Alpha King, the last of the bloodline of the first moon. "No," she whispered, stumbling back. Her shoulders hit the cell wall. "No, that's not... You can't be..." But even as she denied it, she knew it was true. The size of his paws, the color of his fur, those eyes, the way her broken wolf had recognized him when her mind refused to. He was not a pup at all. He was the Alpha King, transformed and imprisoned by magic so dark and complex she could not begin to understand it. The wolf, Kieran, held her gaze steadily. There was no pleading in those eyes, no demand, just patient waiting, as if he knew she needed time to process what had been revealed. "They cursed you," she said, her voice shaking. "The council. They wanted you gone, but couldn't risk killing you outright. So they found a witch, someone powerful enough to trap you in a juvenile form, weak enough to be contained." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The silver chains keep you from breaking the curse, from transforming back. You're trapped. Kieran dipped his head once, an acknowledgement. "And the council controls everything now, your throne, your territories, your pack." She laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. "They rule in your name while you rot down here in the dark, and no one knows, no one even suspects." Her mind raced through the implications. If she freed him, if she somehow broke the chains and the curse, what then? Would he return to power and remember her kindness? Or would he be like every other alpha she had known, using those beneath him and discarding them when they were no longer useful? But even as she thought it, she felt the bond humming between them. Warm and insistent, a golden thread that tied her to him in ways that transcended pack hierarchy and politics. She could sense his exhaustion, his pain, his frustration at being trapped in a form that could not speak, could not explain, could not command. And beneath it all, something else, something that felt like desperate hope mixed with old loneliness. "I'm Omega," she said, as if he might not have noticed. "I'm nothing. I have no power, no influence. I don't even have a wolf that works properly." She pressed her hands against her face, trying to think through the panic. "How am I supposed to help you? Even if I could break the chains, I don't know how to break the curse. I don't know anyone who could..." She stopped, because she did know someone, or knew of someone, the witch in the thornwood, the one the pack whispered about in tones of mixed fear and fascination. She lived beyond pack territory, in the deep forest, where the old magic still ran strong. They said she could break any curse, heal any wound, grant any wish, for a price. Ilara had never paid attention to those stories. Omegas did not go on quests or seek out witches. They kept their heads down and survived. But this was different. This was her mate, a bond she had not chosen but could not deny, trapped and suffering. This was the rightful king, imprisoned by those who should have served him. This was a chance to do something that mattered, to be something more than a broken, discarded thing. Kieran was watching her with those glowing eyes, and she could swear she felt his emotions through the bond. Not words, but impressions, trust, gratitude, and underneath it all a fierce protective instinct that made her realize he could feel her too. Feel her fear and determination, and the small, stubborn core of defiance she had thought beaten out of her years ago. "The witch in the thornwood," she said, testing the words. "If anyone can break the curse, it's her." Kieran's tail moved once, not quite a wag, but close. "But I'd have to leave the pack, steal supplies, travel through rogue territories." She was listing obstacles, but even as she spoke, she was planning. The gaps in the guard rotation, the weak point in the eastern wall, the routes she had memorized during her years of invisibility. "They'll hunt me. If the council realizes what I've done, they'll hunt us both." The wolf stood and moved closer, pressing his head against her knee. The gesture was simple, clear. "I'm worth the risk." Ilara buried her fingers in his fur, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her palm. She thought about her life, the years of abuse and degradation, the way she had slowly disappeared into herself, until she was more ghost than wolf. She thought about dying in this pack, unmated and unmourned. Her body burned without ceremony because Omegas did not deserve funeral rites. Then she thought about running through moonlit forests with a king at her side. About being seen, truly seen, by someone who looked at her with those ancient eyes and did not see broken or defective, just saw her. "All right," she whispered, and felt the bond flare bright between them, warming her from the inside out. "All right, I'll do it. I'll get you out, and we'll find the witch, and we'll break this curse." Kieran rumbled against her, that too-deep sound that was part purr, part growl, all satisfaction. "But first, I need to figure out how to move you. You can barely walk, and the journey will take days, maybe weeks." She stroked his head, thinking, "And I need to gather supplies without arousing suspicion. Money, if I can steal any, food, weapons." She had 3 weeks until the next full moon ceremony. 3 weeks to plan an escape that had almost no chance of success. 3 weeks to transform from invisible Omega to traitor and fugitive. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt more alive than she had in years. The taste of freedom. Ilara stole with the systematic precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. A silver coin here, taken from a drunk alpha's pocket during the chaos of evening meals. A dagger there, lifted from the armory, while the guards watched 2 wolves fight over a female. Dried rations, medical supplies, a coil of rope, a tinderbox, all carefully secreted away in the hidden spaces she had discovered during her years of cleaning. Behind loose stones in the dungeon walls, in the hollow beneath the roots of an old oak at the edge of packed territory, under the floorboards of an abandoned storage shed. She worked her regular shifts with even more care than usual, making herself so forgettable that even the head housekeeper stopped bothering to check her work. Perfect invisibility. The kind of camouflage that would make her disappearance, when it came, seem like nothing more than one Omega finally giving up and walking into the forest to die. It happened more often than the pack liked to admit. At night, she descended to Kieran's cell and worked on his physical therapy with the ruthless determination of someone preparing for war. She made him walk, then trot, then run as much as the small space allowed. She massaged the injured leg, working flexibility back into joints that had stiffened. She fed him raw meat when she could get it, building up his strength. And she talked. She told him everything she had learned about the council's movements, the guard rotations, the political landscape of the pack. She shared her plans for their escape, multiple versions, contingencies upon contingencies. She spoke of the Thornwood and the witch who lived there, whose name was Morgana, and who was said to have been old when the first pack formed. Kieran listened with an intelligence that no longer surprised her. Sometimes she caught him trying to communicate, his body language so precise that she almost understood. A tilt of his head, disapproval, a particular movement of his tail, agreement, a low whine, concern. They were developing a language all their own, built on instinct and the bond that grew stronger each day. She could feel him now even when they were apart. A warm presence at the back of her mind, a constant awareness of his emotional state. When he was in pain, her chest ached. When he was content, she felt a peace that seemed to come from outside herself. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. On the 20th night, she brought bolt cutters stolen from the blacksmith's forge. They were too small for the chains, she had known they would be. But desperation made her try anyway. She worked until her hands cramped and blistered, the muscles in her arms screaming, while Kieran stood perfectly still and let her attempt the impossible. The chains did not even dent. "Damn it!" she breathed, throwing the cutters aside. They clattered against stone, the sound too loud in the enclosed space. "Damn it! Damn it! Damn it!" Kieran nosed at her hand, gentle despite his own frustration. She could feel it through the bond. Not anger at her failure, but concern for her state of mind. "We're running out of time," she told him, pulling him close. He had grown in the past 3 weeks, his frame filling out now that he was properly fed and cared for. He was nearly to her hip when standing, large for his apparent age, but still far too small to be the Alpha King, still trapped in a juvenile form by magic that refused to break. "The full moon is in 5 days. They'll have the ceremony, and I'll be expected to present myself to the Alphas for selection." She had been avoiding thinking about it. But what happened to unmated Omegas during the blood moon? How they were lined up and chosen like livestock, claimed for the night by whatever Alpha wanted them. How she had endured it 3 times before, each experience leaving new scars on her psyche. She would not survive a 4th. She knew that with cold certainty. Something in her would break completely, and she would become one of the shells. The Omegas who walked through life without ever really being present, their minds shattered by repeated trauma. "We have to go," she decided, the words spilling out before she fully processed them. "Tomorrow night. It's not ideal, but we're out of time. I'll have to carry you. The chains will slow us down, but maybe distance from the pack will weaken the spell. Maybe once we're far enough away, you'll be able to shift back." It was desperate hope, built on nothing but wishful thinking. But it was all she had. Kieran pulled back to look at her, his blue eyes serious. He held her gaze for a long moment, then deliberately pressed his forehead against hers. The gesture was so human, so intimate, that she felt tears prick her eyes. Through the bond, she felt his agreement, his trust, his determination to protect her, even though he was the one in chains. "Tomorrow," she repeated, committing to it. "We leave tomorrow." She spent that final day in a state of controlled panic, her movements automatic while her mind raced through everything that could go wrong. She gathered the last of her supplies, distributed among several hidden locations along their planned route. She watched the guard patterns with new intensity, timing their movements down to the second. She memorized the forest paths she had studied in old maps, the ones that would take them toward the Thornwood and away from patrol territories. As the sun set on what might be her last day in the pack, Ilara stood at her narrow window and watched wolves gather in the courtyard below. They were laughing, fighting, celebrating the full moon that would rise tomorrow night. They looked so free, so comfortable in their strength and status. She felt nothing but contempt. These wolves, her pack, had created a hierarchy built on cruelty. They had thrown away anyone who did not fit their narrow definition of worthy. They had imprisoned their king and let corrupt elders rule in his place, and not one of them had questioned it. Not one of them had noticed or cared that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. She was about to betray them all, to steal their rightful alpha and run into the wilderness, chasing a desperate hope that might end with both of them dead. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she smiled, a sharp, fierce expression that looked foreign on her usually blank face. Let them hunt her. Let them send their best trackers and fiercest warriors. She would already be gone, a ghost fading into the forest with a king in chains and a heart that had finally remembered how to be brave. She turned from the window and began her final preparations. By this time tomorrow, she would either be free or dead. Both seemed preferable to one more day of invisible suffering. Into the dark woods. The guard change happened at midnight. Ilara had counted on it. The brief window of confusion when the evening shift overlapped with the night patrol, when wolves were more focused on gossip and transition than on watching empty corridors. She moved through the pack house like smoke, her cleaning bucket in hand as camouflage, taking a route she had mapped and memorized over 3 weeks of careful observation. The dungeons were quiet. She descended the spiral stairs for what might be the last time, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Every shadow seemed to hold watching eyes. Every echo of her footsteps sounded like an alarm. Kieran was waiting at the bars of his cell, his blue eyes glowing in the darkness. He knew. Through the bond, she felt his readiness, his coiled tension, his absolute focus. She opened the cell with shaking hands. "We have perhaps 20 minutes before the night shift completes their first round. After that, they'll notice if anyone is moving through the lower levels." He emerged from the cell, moving with a grace that belied the chains. She had wrapped the silver in strips of cloth stolen from the medical bay. It would not stop the burning completely, but it would muffle the sound and protect her hands when she needed to carry him. "Can you run?" she whispered. He took a few experimental steps, then nodded, a distinctly human gesture in his wolf body. "Stay close. If we encounter anyone, let me do the talking. You're just a pup I found abandoned." "Understood. I'm taking you to the healers." They moved through the dungeon levels quickly, Ilara's every sense heightened to painful awareness. The smell of damp stone, the sound of water dripping somewhere distant, the scrape of Kieran's claws against the floor, barely audible, but loud as thunder in her ears. They made it to the main level, without incident. Here, the danger multiplied. The pack house was never truly empty. There were always wolves coming and going, patrols moving through, servants hurrying on late-night errands. She timed their movement carefully, slipping from shadow to shadow, using her intimate knowledge of the building's layout. The eastern door was guarded, as she had known it would be. But the guard was young, newly elevated to his position, and drunk enough that his attention wavered. She waited until he turned to call out to a passing friend, then slipped through the door with Kieran pressed against her leg. The night air hit her face like a blessing, cold and clean, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. She allowed herself one breath to savor it, then moved quickly toward the tree line. They were 50 yards from the pack house when the alarm sounded. It started as a howl, high and sharp, cutting through the night with the precision of a blade. The call was taken up by other voices, spreading through the pack like wildfire. Someone had noticed. A guard doing rounds in the dungeons, perhaps, or a servant who had seen 2 shapes slipping through shadows. "Run!" Ilara gasped, breaking into a sprint. Kieran kept pace beside her, his limp barely noticeable now, adrenaline overriding pain. They plunged into the forest just as lights began to blaze in the packhouse windows, as more howls joined the alarm. The forest at night was a different world. Trees became walls of shadow, roots caught at her feet, branches whipped her face. She ran with the desperate speed of prey, her heart in her throat, Kieran a pale blur beside her. Behind them, she heard the thunder of pursuit. Wolves in their animal forms, faster and stronger, closing the distance with terrifying speed. She would not outrun them. She had known that from the start. But she had prepared. The first trap was a shallow pit, covered with branches and leaves, positioned on the most obvious path away from the pack house. She heard the yelp of surprise, the snarl of pain, as a wolf fell through. It would not hold them long, but it might slow them down. The second trap was a rope snare, thin and nearly invisible in the dark. Another wolf went down, its howl of frustration echoing through the trees. But there were too many. Always too many. She heard them spreading out, surrounding her, cutting off escape routes with the practiced efficiency of born hunters. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed. She stumbled over a root and nearly went down, catching herself at the last second. Kieran snarled, a sound that came from deep in his chest, far too large for his size. Through the bond, she felt his rage, his helplessness. He wanted to fight, to defend her, but the chains and his juvenile form made him nearly useless in combat. They burst into a small clearing, and there, finally, was the cache she had hidden. A fallen log, hollowed out and filled with supplies. She grabbed the pack, swinging it onto her shoulders without breaking stride, and veered left toward the river. The water was their only chance. It would mask their scent, hide their trail. If they could reach it before the pack caught them, they might survive the night. The first wolf broke through the trees ahead of them, massive and dark-furred, an alpha in his prime. He blocked their path with bared teeth, his growl rumbling like distant thunder. Ilara did not hesitate. She pulled the dagger from her belt and charged, screaming, a sound of pure defiance that shocked the wolf into momentary stillness. She was Omega. She was not supposed to fight back. She was supposed to submit. She drove the blade toward his throat. He dodged, but not quite fast enough. The dagger scored a line across his shoulder, drawing blood. He yelped and fell back, more from surprise than pain. It gave her the opening she needed. She broke past him, Kieran at her heels, and ran for the sound of rushing water. The river was 30 feet wide and swollen with spring melt. The current ran fast and cold, dark as ink under the moonless sky. She did not let herself think about hypothermia or drowning or the 100 ways this could kill them. She just ran straight into the water, gasping as the cold hit her like a physical blow. Kieran hesitated for only a second, then followed. The water reached his chest immediately, the current threatening to sweep him away. Ilara grabbed the chains, using them as a leash to keep him close, and began to swim toward the far bank. The pursuing wolves reached the river's edge and stopped. They could swim, all wolves could, but the water was dangerous and they had no way of knowing where their prey would emerge. She heard shouting, the sound of arguments about whether to follow or spread out along the banks. It gave her the time she needed. She dragged herself and Kieran onto the far bank, her clothes heavy with water, her body shaking with cold and adrenaline. They collapsed together in the mud, breathing hard, while behind them the pack howled their frustration into the night. "We made it," she whispered, hardly believing it. "We actually made it." Through the bond, she felt Kieran's exhausted agreement, and beneath it, something else, pride, in her, in them both. She allowed herself 2 minutes to rest, then forced herself to stand. They were not safe yet. The pack would send trackers at first light, would search every inch of the forest. They needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and their former home before dawn. "Come on," she told Kieran, offering her hand to help him up. "We have a long way to go." He stood, shook water from his fur, and began to walk. Together, they disappeared into the dark woods, leaving behind everything they had known in search of freedom they had not yet earned. The Witch of Thorn Wood. 5 days they traveled, moving deeper into territories that no longer smelled of pack or civilization. The forest grew wilder, older, trees reaching heights that seemed to touch the sky. The air changed, growing thick with magic that made Ilara's skin prickle and her damaged wolf instincts sing with unease. They saw no signs of pursuit after the second day. Either the pack had given up, or they feared these woods too much to follow. The Thornwood had a reputation, stories of wolves who entered and never returned, of paths that twisted back on themselves, of a witch who collected the hearts of those who displeased her. Ilara pushed the stories aside. She had no choice but to go forward. Kieran's condition was deteriorating despite her care. The constant travel, the stress, the silver slowly poisoning his system, all of it was taking its toll. He moved more slowly each day, his steps becoming labored, his bright eyes dimming. She carried him when he could walk no more, the silver chains burning through the cloth wrappings into her arms. The pain was nothing compared to the terror of feeling him grow weaker through their bond, his presence in her mind fading like a dying ember. "Hold on," she whispered to him on the 5th night, as she made camp in the shelter of a massive oak. "Please, just hold on. We're close. I can feel it." She could feel it. The magic was different here, concentrated in ways that had nothing to do with pack dynamics or wolf instincts. This was old power, the kind that existed before humans and wolves, before the world had been divided into territories and hierarchies. The witch was near. At dawn they found her cottage, or it found them. One moment they were walking through dense undergrowth, and the next, the trees simply parted to reveal a clearing. In its center sat a house that looked grown rather than built, its walls twisted living wood, its roof thatched with something that might have been moss or might have been hair. Smoke rose from a chimney, the scent of herbs and something darker, blood perhaps, or old bones, drifted on the morning breeze. Ilara approached slowly, Kieran leaning heavily against her leg. She could feel his fear through the bond, mixed with hope and desperate exhaustion. If this witch could not help them, he would die. Soon. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone. Before she could knock, the door swung open. The witch was not what she expected. Ilara had imagined someone ancient and wizened, bent with age. Instead, Morgana appeared perhaps 30, with sharp features and hair the color of storm clouds. Her eyes were the most striking feature, one gold, one silver, both gleaming with intelligence that seemed older than the trees themselves. "An Omega and a cursed king," Morgana said, her voice carrying an accent Ilara could not place. "How interesting. I wondered when you would arrive. You knew we were coming?" Ilara's voice came out rough from days of silence. "Of course, I cast the spell." Morgana smiled, showing teeth too sharp to be entirely human. Or rather, I was paid handsomely to cast it. The Council of Elders were quite insistent that their Alpha King needed to be contained. Rage flooded through Ilara, so intense she swayed. "You did this to him? You trapped him in this form, knowing he would suffer?" "I cast a spell as commissioned. What the Council chose to do with him afterward was not my concern." Morgana's gaze shifted to Kieran, assessing. "Though I admit, I am impressed he survived. The silver should have killed him within weeks. That he lasted 3 months speaks to the strength of his bloodline." "Then you can break it," Ilara said, forcing the words through gritted teeth. "The curse, you can break it." "Can I?" Morgana tilted her head. "Yes, I suppose I could, for a price. I have money, not much, but I do not want your money, little Omega." The witch moved closer, circling them like a predator examining prey. "I want something more interesting, something that will make this transaction worth my while." Ilara's hand tightened on the dagger at her belt. "Name it. Your bond." The words landed like a physical blow. Ilara staggered back, pulling Kieran with her. "What?" "The mate bond between you." Morgana gestured at the golden thread of connection that only they could feel. "It is rare, you know. True bonds formed across pack hierarchies between Omega and Alpha. Even more rare when one party is of the first moon bloodline. The magic in such a bond could power 100 spells, could grant me abilities I have only dreamed of." "No," Ilara breathed. "Absolutely not. There has to be something else. There is nothing else I want." Morgana's expression was not cruel exactly, more curious, as if she were examining an interesting puzzle. "You came to me seeking help. I have named my price, the bond for the cure. His freedom for your connection. It is, I think, a fair trade. Fair? Ilara's voice rose to a shout. You want me to give up the one thing that matters, the one person who has ever seen me as more than broken, and you call that fair? I want you to choose, Morgana corrected. Love or survival, connection or power. It is always the same choice in the end, and it always costs everything. Kieran was growling, a constant rumble of fury and denial. Through the bond, Ilara felt his desperation. Not for himself, he would rather die than force her to give up their connection. But she felt her own resolve as well, her determination. If she walked away now, he would die. The council would remain in power. Everything she had risked, everything she had become over these past weeks would be meaningless. And more than that, if she died tomorrow, at least she would have known what it felt like to matter, to be someone's partner rather than their property, to feel a bond that chose her, that saw worth in her when everyone else had seen only defect and failure. If I agree, she said slowly, what happens to us, to the bond? It will simply cease to exist. You will remember that it was there, but you will not feel the loss. It will be as if it never formed. Morgana watched her carefully. You will be free of each other. No obligations, no connection, just two wolves who happened to meet in a dungeon and shared an adventure. Freedom. The word tasted like ash on Ilara's tongue. She looked down at Kieran, at those blue eyes that had first seen her in the darkness and had never looked away. She thought about the nights in his cell, talking until dawn about everything and nothing, about the way he listened, how he made her feel heard in a way she had never experienced, about running through the forest with him at her side, finally brave enough to fight back against the pack that had broken her. She thought about living without that, about being alone again, invisible again, with no golden thread tying her to something that mattered. It would destroy her. She knew that with cold certainty, but she would be alive to be destroyed, and so would he. Break the curse, she said, her voice hollow. Take the bond. Do whatever you need to do, just save him. Kieran lunged forward, trying to put himself between Ilara and the witch, but Morgana simply raised a hand, and he froze, held by invisible threads of magic. Do not make this harder than it needs to be, King, Morgana said almost gently. She has made her choice. Honor it. The witch began to chant in a language that predated words, that sounded like wind through ancient caves and the cracking of winter ice. Her hands moved in intricate patterns, weaving something Ilara could not see but could feel. Threads of power pulling at her chest, at the golden warmth that connected her to Kieran. It hurt, not physically, but in ways that had no name. Like watching the sun be slowly extinguished, like feeling a part of her soul being carefully, methodically excised. Through the bond, while it still existed, she felt Kieran's anguish, his fury at himself for being trapped, for requiring this sacrifice. His desperate love, so new and so powerful it felt like drowning and flying all at once. I'm sorry, she whispered, knowing he could hear her through their connection one last time. I'm so sorry, but I choose you. I will always choose you. The bond snapped. Ilara gasped, doubling over as if she had been punched. The golden thread was gone, the warmth in her chest extinguished. Where Kieran's presence had lived in her mind, there was only silence, vast and empty and terrible. She looked at him and felt nothing, saw a wolf in chains, beautiful and suffering, but distant. A stranger she had helped, someone who no longer mattered in the visceral way he had mattered moments before. The loss was so profound she could not even cry. Morgana's chanting grew louder, more intense. The air crackled with power. The chains around Kieran began to glow, heating to red-hot brightness. He snarled in pain, his small body convulsing. And then he began to change. Not a normal shift. This was violent, agonizing, the curse being ripped away by force. His body stretched, bones breaking and reforming, fur receding and then growing back in different patterns. He grew larger, his juvenile form burning away to reveal what had been hidden beneath. When the light faded, a man knelt in the grass where the wolf pup had been. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a warrior's build. His hair was the same silver white as his fur had been, falling to his shoulders in tangled waves. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic features, marked with scars that spoke of battles fought and survived. And his eyes, still that impossible blue, now blazing with power and ancient authority. The chains fell away, the silver clattering uselessly to the ground. Kieran rose slowly, testing his human form as if relearning how to use it. When he finally stood at full height, the air around him seemed to shimmer with barely contained power. This was an Alpha King of the First Moon bloodline, returned to his rightful form. He looked at Ilara, and his expression held no recognition, no warmth, just the cool assessment of a king examining someone who had performed a service. "You have my gratitude," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "You will be rewarded for your assistance." The words were correct, appropriate, but they landed like blows. Because she remembered, even if the bond was gone, she remembered what it had felt like to matter to him. And now she was just another subject, another Omega who had helped her king and would receive appropriate compensation. "The curse is broken," Morgana said, looking satisfied. "My payment is received. Our transaction is complete." She turned to go back into her cottage, then paused. "A word of advice, little Omega. Sometimes the cruelest curse is not the one that traps you in chains, but the one that shows you what you could have had and then takes it away." The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the clearing. Ilara and Kieran stood in awkward silence. He was free. She had saved him. And now there was nothing left between them except the memory of something that no longer existed. "I should return to my kingdom," Kieran said, already moving toward the path that would lead back to civilization. "There is much to be done. The council must answer for their treason." "Yes," Ilara agreed, her voice flat. "Of course." He hesitated, something flickering across his face too quickly for her to identify. "You could come with me, to the capital. I will ensure you are given a position, a home. You need not return to the pack that abused you." It was a generous offer, more than generous, but the thought of being near him, of serving in his household while feeling nothing except the echo of what they had lost, seemed like a special kind of torture. "I think I'll travel for a while," she said instead. "See what else is out there." Kieran nodded, accepting her decision with the easy grace of someone who had no personal stake in her choices. "Then I wish you well, Ilara. You saved my life. I will not forget that." He shifted then, his form flowing seamlessly into that of a massive silver wolf, the alpha he was always meant to be. Without looking back, he loped into the forest, heading toward his kingdom and the vengeance that awaited the traitors who had imprisoned him. Ilara watched him go until he disappeared completely. Then she sank to her knees in the grass and finally allowed herself to weep. She had saved him. She had done the right thing, the heroic thing. She had chosen his life over her own happiness, and she had never felt more empty in her entire life. The Hollow Crown. 3 months passed. Ilara wandered the territories beyond Packlands, taking odd jobs in human towns where no one cared about wolf hierarchies or Omega status. She cleaned taverns, worked in stables, helped with harvests. The work was simple and anonymous, and she threw herself into it with mechanical precision. She did not shift. Her wolf, already damaged, had retreated completely after the bond was severed. She could not reach it, could not feel the animal presence that should have lived beneath her skin. She was more human than wolf now, trapped in a single form. It should have bothered her more than it did, but she felt very little these days, just a constant, low-grade numbness punctuated by sharp moments of grief that came without warning. She heard news of the kingdom, of course. Travelers in taverns loved to gossip. And the return of the Alpha King was the story of the decade, how he had appeared seemingly from nowhere, how he had challenged the Council of Elders and torn them apart, literally, for their treason, how he had restructured the pack hierarchy, elevating those who had been overlooked and punishing those who had enabled corruption. They called him the Just King, the Merciful. He had ended the practice of Omega submission ceremonies, had given rights to those previously considered property. The pack was transforming under his rule, becoming something closer to the ideal society the founding wolves had dreamed of. Elara was glad, genuinely. Her sacrifice had meant something. Wolves who might have suffered as she had suffered would now have better lives. It just didn't ease the emptiness in her chest. She was working in a small village on the edge of wolf territory when she heard about the gathering. The Alpha King was summoning all wolves, regardless of rank, to the capital for a grand assembly. It was unprecedented, a celebration of the new order, and a chance for every wolf to be heard. Elara had no intention of going. She had left that world behind, but the innkeeper where she worked, an old human woman with kind eyes, had other ideas. "You should go," she said one evening, handing Elara a clean dress and a small purse of coins. "Whatever you're running from, whatever broke inside you, you won't heal it by hiding in my stable." "I'm not hiding," Elara protested. "Child, you are the very definition of hiding." The woman patted her hand. "Go to your people. Face whatever it is you're afraid of. If it doesn't help, you can always come back and shovel more horse manure." So Elara went. She told herself it was just to see the capital, to witness the changes Kieran had made. It had nothing to do with wanting to see him again, to confirm that the distance between them was real and permanent. The capital was transformed. Where once it had been cold stone and rigid hierarchy, now it buzzed with energy and life. Wolves of all ranks mingled freely in the streets. Omegas walked without fear. The scent of cooking food and celebration filled the air. The grand assembly was held in the throne room, a massive space carved from white stone, open to the sky. Thousands of wolves packed into it, their voices creating a constant hum of excitement. And on the throne, wearing a crown of antlers and silver, sat Kieran. He looked every inch the king, powerful, commanding, distant. His blue eyes scanned the crowd with the careful attention of a ruler who took his responsibilities seriously. He was addressing the assembly, speaking of justice and unity and the new pack they would build together. Elara stayed at the back, hidden in the crowd. She just wanted to see him, to confirm he was well. Then she would leave and continue her wandering. But halfway through his speech, Kieran stopped, his head turned, nostrils flaring as if catching a scent. His eyes swept the crowd more urgently now, searching for something. He stood abruptly, his advisor looking confused. The crowd fell silent, confused by the interruption. "Find her," Kieran said, his voice carrying across the entire space. "The Omega with dark hair and grey eyes. Bring her to me. Now." Elara's heart hammered. She tried to melt back into the crowd, to disappear the way she had always disappeared. But wolves were already moving, parting to reveal her, guided by the Alpha's command. 2 guards approached her, gently, respectfully, and gestured for her to follow. She had no choice. "You did not refuse a direct summons from the Alpha King." They led her through the crowd, every eye tracking her movement, up the steps to the throne platform. Kieran descended to meet her, and this close she could see that his carefully controlled expression was cracking. Something blazed in his blue eyes, emotion she could not name because she could no longer feel what he was feeling. "You came," he said, and his voice was rough with something that might have been relief or grief or both. "I was curious," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "I wanted to see what you had built. I built it for you." The words came out like a confession. All of this, the reforms, the new laws, the end of Omega oppression. I built it because I remembered what they did to you, because I wanted to create a world where someone like you would be valued, protected, cherished. Elara blinked. confusion piercing through her numbness. "I don't understand. The bond is gone." You shouldn't care about me beyond basic gratitude." "The bond is gone," Kieran agreed, "but memory is not. I remember every moment in that cell, every word you spoke to me. I remember how you risked everything to save me. And I remember," his voice broke slightly, "I remember that I loved you, that you were my mate. The bond is severed, but the love remains." "That's not possible," she whispered. Morgana took the magic, not the emotion. "She severed our supernatural connection, but she could not erase what I feel, what I chose to feel even before the bond snapped into place." He stepped closer, his massive frame somehow gentle. "I loved you when you were just an omega cleaning my cell, when you talked to me through the long nights and treated me with more compassion than anyone in my entire life. The bond only confirmed what already existed." Tears streamed down Ilara's face. "But I don't feel it. I look at you and I remember loving you, but I don't feel it anymore. It's just empty." "I know." Kieran reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and wiped her tears with his thumb. "Morgana's magic affected you differently, because you were the one who initiated the sacrifice. But Ilara," he held her gaze with painful intensity, "bonds can be rebuilt. Not through magic, but through choice, through time and trust, and choosing each other every day." "You're the Alpha King," she said desperately. "You could have anyone. Why would you want someone broken, someone who can't even feel what she should feel?" "Because you're not broken. You never were." His voice was fierce now. "You are the bravest person I've ever known. You challenged a pack that abused you, saved a king, without knowing if he would remember you, gave up everything for someone else's freedom. You are extraordinary, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you, if you'll let me." The crowd around them had gone completely silent, hundreds of wolves watching their king bare his heart to an omega who should have been beneath his notice. "I don't know if I can love you again," Ilara admitted, the truth painful and raw. "I remember it, but remembering isn't the same as feeling." "Then let me love you enough for both of us," Kieran said simply, "until you remember how. Until you feel it again. However long it takes, I will wait." He was offering her everything, a place at his side, his devotion, his patience, not because of a bond that no longer existed, but because of a choice he was making freely. Ilara thought about the past 3 months of numbness and wandering, thought about the empty space in her chest where Kieran's presence used to live, thought about the old innkeeper's words about hiding. "I'm terrified," she confessed. "Me too," Kieran admitted. "But I'm willing to be terrified together if you are." She looked at him, really looked, and tried to see past the memory of what they had been, tried to see what they could become if she was brave enough to try. She saw a man who had suffered and survived, who had been given power and used it to help those who had none, who was offering her not destiny, but choice, the freedom to love him or not, to stay or go, to build something new on the ruins of what had been sacrificed. "Okay," she whispered, "let's try." The smile that broke across Kieran's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He did not grab her, did not presume, just offered his hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. Ilara took it, and felt the first tiny spark of something that might, someday, become warmth again. The crowd erupted in cheers, but she barely heard them. She was too focused on the feel of Kieran's hand in hers, solid and real. On the way, he looked at her like she was precious rather than broken. It would take time. The love would have to be rebuilt piece by piece, memory by memory, choice by choice. But standing there in the throne room, surrounded by the new world they had both helped create, Ilara thought maybe that was okay. Maybe choosing love every day was more powerful than any bond magic could create. Maybe the hardest curses to break were not the ones cast by witches, but the ones we cast on ourselves. The belief that we were not worthy of being chosen, of being seen, of mattering. And maybe, just maybe, they could both learn to be whole again.